Hello, everyone, and welcome to GEMA Talks. We are excited for our next installment today with Patrick Steele, the former CEO of Politico. Patrick is a Georgetown MBA alumnus, and for those who don't know, it just did a phenomenal job taking over Politico in 2017, and over that 4.5-year period, taking the company from one that was unprofitable to a company that was highly successful, high margin business and growing, which ultimately led to the sale of the company recently in October of 2021. And Patrick departed the company after the sale. So we're really excited to talk about what went into his strategy in taking this company from a challenging situation to a hugely successful outcome. Another area we're going to touch on, which again, I find very compelling with Patrick, is he actually had 3 highly successful, long tenured careers in 3 separate fields. He began his career in the world of government. He then pivoted and became a senior executive in the corporate finance banking world. And then after that, he went into media when he joined Politico. So I really look forward to asking him about those shifts in his career, what led to them, what was sort of a thread that he can point to for what led to success for him in all 3 of these fields. So without further ado, let's welcome Patrick. Patrick, how are you?
Good, Rich. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you. Great to have you. I always like to start sort of from the beginning. I love to understand, when you were younger, what led you into the career choices you made. I know you grew up in New York City. That's correct?
That's right. Upper West Side. Yeah.
And I think, you went into the political government world as your first sort of foray into the working world. Talk a little bit about what informed that decision and talk about what you were doing in college. You went to University of Pennsylvania, a little bit about that to lead up to that career.
Sure. I was a history major at Penn, and I ended up doing a master's degree in political theory right after college at University College in London. And I was always interested in politics as a kid. My family was not involved directly. My dad was a very progressive civil rights lawyer. And so I thought a lot about politics and policy growing up. And it was always something that interested me. My master's degree sort of brought me to Washington in, I guess that was 1990. And I sort of got the bug. I ended up, I was finishing up my dissertation working out of the Library of Congress, and I got a job with a think tank in Washington. And it was 1991 and the presidential election was on in 92. And I just, I sort of got interested and I started volunteering on the weekends for one of the presidential candidates. But that was, I always had a keen interest in politics growing up.
Right. So you start working in the political realm. What was sort of your first official job in the world of government?
Well, I was, at the time I was working for, in the 92 campaign, I initially started working for Bob Kerrey, who was the senator from Nebraska.
Right.
He dropped out and I ended up getting picked up ultimately by the Bill Clinton's presidential campaign. And I ran around the country on the national advance team, doing events all through the summer and fall of 1992. Clinton won the election. And I moved to Washington. I got a job in the administration. I had a number of different jobs, but I worked for 2 different cabinet secretaries, and I spent 3 years in the White House as a special assistant to the president and presidential scheduler.
And how would you characterize, if you had to use some adjectives, how would you characterize the overall experience of working in government and in the White House and for Clinton?
I mean, it was extraordinary. I was, in my sort of mid 20s, late 20s, sort of when I moved to Washington. And, it was just remarkable working in the White House with, some of the most impressive people that you could ever imagine, starting with President Clinton, who was really just one of the most incredible people, but just remarkable to watch. So intelligent, so capable, so, just sort of nuanced on politics and policy. It was an extraordinary time and experience. and I got to deal with, very, frankly, very serious and important people at a pretty young age in my career. And I think that had a real impact on me. And you learned how to deal with cabinet secretaries and presidents. And I think that was an invaluable experience. And I met my wife, who was also working in the White House. Right. We've been together for 25 years. And so in so many ways, that first experience was really a guiding experience for me.
Is there something about that experience that people maybe just aren't aware of or have a misconception about? If you had to say, even for yourself, what was most surprising about that experience, what would you say?
Well, I mean, we have a government of, I think, roughly 3 million people, federal employees, and the number of political appointees that actually sort of run these agencies and the White House is really tiny. It's a very small group of people that the president is able to bring into the administration. And, the other thing I would say, there's no other job where everything that happens in the world at any moment, whether it's domestic or foreign, impacts you in your job and in your work when you work in the White House. And it doesn't matter if it's, some major economic announcement. Obviously we're dealing with hyperinflation, but there was always something, or right. President Rabin being assassinated, which I'll never forget. Everything that happens in the real world impacts sort of your life and the flow at the White House. And there's really no other position that I've found, as intense as the role was at Politico, where you're just responding constantly to, sort of events that are totally beyond your control in so many ways.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's fascinating. And again, every day must be different, I'm sure, as well. Okay. So you're in government close to 10 years, I think. And what happened next?
I made a decision that I didn't want to spend my life working for the government, and whether it was sort of, involved in, as a government official or lobbying or, sort of communications strategy around government affairs, I just wanted to do something different. And so I ultimately I ended up going to Georgetown on the weekends, my last couple of years in the White House. And I really used Georgetown in many ways as a pivot. I used to say I had the big sort of G on my forehead for government. As a young guy, that's all I had done. I'd right. never worked with a P&L. And I just thought that would be an interesting way for me to transition into something else. And so I got my MBA in 2000. Al Gore actually lost the election a few months later. And, I was in a position where it gave me an opportunity to sort of pivot into another field. And I was hired by Friedman Billings Ramsey, which is a boutique investment bank based in Washington. Right. I'd taken one finance class in business school, and I really didn't know anything about corporate finance. I was, I think, probably 32 years old at the time, but I was looking for a pivot, and, I figured I would be able to figure it out.
Yeah. And just to go back to the business school experience, what was that experience like? And is it one that you recommend to others, particularly after you've been in the workforce for quite a while, like you were? Or talk a little bit about that.
It's a great question. And I mean, I think it was a great experience for me. Paul Almeida, who's now the dean of Georgetown's Business School, was one of my professors. He actually taught me strategy 22, 23 years ago.
Yeah.
It was a remarkable faculty, and I really didn't have any practical business experience. I wasn't sort of a classic entrepreneur who'd worked on a startup. I hadn't gone to Wall Street to work as an analyst at an investment bank. So I really didn't have any of those experiences to draw on. And for me, I felt like I got an incredible education, a well-rounded education. And I learned things that I, really had no experience up until that point in my life.
Yeah. And probably safe to say you would not have been able to get into the corporate finance world if you hadn't gone to business school.
Impossible. There's no way. I mean, it would, at that age, a mid-career pivot. I was 32 after 10 years working in politics and government. There was no way. It worked for that reason alone. It was worth it. But I truly got a great education, and it was invaluable. And it's, those are those are experiences, lessons that, I've drawn upon over the last, 20 years as both a banker and a CEO of a media company.
Yeah. So when you went to FBR, you had a long, over 16, 17-year career there, and you worked in different parts of the company. Talk a little bit about what do you think made you successful in that world? Because again, you didn't really have any background in it to draw on. What do you think made you successful in that job and in those positions?
I would say, the thread that I see from working in the government to investment banking to media is, relationships really matter in life. And I had dealt with very sophisticated senior level White House and agency officials. And the company I was at, even though I was, I didn't have as much finance experience, they were comfortable putting me in a relationship manager position with CEOs and CFOs of companies that we were doing business with. And so I was able to relate and connect with a lot of the people that we did banking business for. And I think that was a key reason that I was successful. I mean, the first year I was there, again, it was all just trying to understand the business and the world of finance. But ultimately, investment banking is, whatever your split is, I thought it was, about 20% finance, about 80% trust and relationships. And so I was pretty good at the relationship side of the business.
Yeah. And obviously execution is so important, right? Anyone can walk into a room and dazzle a potential client, but you also have to deliver on the other end.
It was all about, at the end of the day, it was all about sort of trying to deliver flawless execution. And, as a banker, managing a team of other, sort of junior bankers, accountants, lawyers. It is a complicated process. And you have to, in life, you have to deal with curveballs. And there was, as any deal person can tell you, there every day was a curveball. And so being sort of able to adjust, pivot, and, sort of keep the trains on the track, ultimately keeping your, staying focused on the ultimate goal was executing the deal on behalf of your client. Those were things that, having worked in the White House at a pretty high level, I learned how to do at a young age.
Yeah. And what were the different areas you worked in inside FBR?
So we were really, really strong in financial services, real estate, insurance. I like to say, asset intensive businesses. Mm-hmm. I did work in energy sort of later in my years there. But I think you and I talked a few days ago. I had no real experience, none whatsoever in media and really little to none in tech. And so, that was all new to me when I came to Politico.
Yeah. So I know that FBR ended up going through where they were acquired. And during that process, I think you started mulling potentially other opportunities. And I think the Politico opportunity came kind of out of nowhere. Can you talk a little bit about what led to you even hearing about an opportunity there and what led you to decide to go for it, even though you had literally zero experience in media or journalism or the news world?
Well,
you really knew a lot about politics, so that was helpful.
I sort of, on one level, I made the pivot from government to finance, and I figured that out. And so, with every pivot, it sort of gives you more and more confidence that you're going to be able to sort of try something entirely new and reinvent yourself. And so, I wasn't afraid of that challenge. I understood the risks involved in it, but I wasn't afraid of that challenge. I would just taking a step back because obviously, I went to Georgetown and as I said, it was such a great experience. As I think about, sort of my experience in life, almost all of them were based on friendships and relationships I built at some level, either, in college or graduate school or in the White House. And so, just keeping those relationships that you build in your life at different stages alive have had a way of coming back to me over the course of my life. But the short story, which I think you're getting at, is I went to college with Tory Burch. She was the global iconic fashion designer. Her foundation, the Tory Burch Foundation, had a partnership with Politico called Women Rule, about women in leadership. And she got to know the publisher, Robert Albrecht, and his wife. And she really called me absolutely out of the blue. Politico had just gone through a leadership transition. The founder and CEO had left to start a competitor. And she just thought that Robert Albrecht and I would connect. And so she was really the connection point. Ultimately, Robert was an experienced media guy. He'd owned 32 television stations. He had started Politico a decade before I came on the scene. And he was less concerned about my lack of experience in media, really looking for somebody that understood how a P&L worked, had a network in Washington, which is where Politico is based, which I did, right. And fundamentally knew how to get things done. And we've talked about the execution side. So he wasn't necessarily looking at that moment for a seasoned media executive. He was looking for somebody, I think, a little bit scrappier.
Yeah, and probably too didn't mind the fact that you could kind of come in as a change agent and look with a completely fresh set of eyes. Which
100%. When I tell you I knew absolutely nothing about the media business, I knew absolutely nothing about it. It was everything I learned was on the job. I tried to, when you start these new roles, especially when you make a complete pivot in sector, it was really a full 6 months of trying to get up to speed as quickly as I could on so many different aspects of the business. The other thing that is sort of relevant, and again, I share this only so I want people to, I want the Georgetown community to understand, like you can smart people with decent values and good work ethics, they can figure almost anything out. And I'm a reasonably intelligent guy, and I was able to figure it out. But it took intense study over that first 6 months period. And frankly, it was terrifying because I had never managed probably more than 8 or 10 people. Right. So I'd never been a CEO, and I'd never worked in the media space. So I had 2 pretty big checks against me. But I was able to overcome that just through sort of resilience and persistence and agility and all the things that are sort of critical to leadership.
Yeah. Just to give some guidance to folks listening in or watching who may be trying to do something like this or in the middle of doing something like this. You mentioned the 6 months, but really right at the outset, what was sort of your game plan? Okay, I'm coming in pretty cold here into this sector. If you can remember, what were some of the first key things you felt like you had to do?
Well, there were the internal stakeholders, the employees, and then there were external stakeholders. And I Politico was in a very difficult spot at the time. We were not profitable by a fairly wide margin, and a lot of the senior leadership from the sort of previous team had left, and so I kind of had to do both at the same time. But I would say the first 90 days, it was a combination of really just trying to understand how the company operated, right. How the publication, down to the basics of how a publication functions, but also, sort of immediately hitting the street and meeting with, sort of our major advertisers and subscribers and sort of trying to rebuild relationships that had frayed when the previous team left. So I didn't have, I did not have the luxury of time. I had to move, and I had to move immediately. It wasn't I wouldn't call it a dire situation, but it was a fairly significant turnaround needed to take place.
I think that's an important point to know, because when you said earlier, almost anyone can figure it out, like a reasonably intelligent person. But the other factor that you just threw into it, which complicates it, and I've had experience with this too, is time, right? So if somebody said you got 10 years to figure it out, no, that's a no-brainer. But you didn't have that much time to figure out. So you also had the time pressure on you as well, which I think you can't forget.
Yeah, and we had a new competitor that was coming right at us. We were the bullseye, and
who had started Politico.
Yes, and so a brilliant guy and a visionary who created Politico and then Axios, but they were coming right at us, and everybody knew it, and a lot of people were looking over their shoulder, sort of quite concerned about what the future would bring, and with these organizations, you always have the opportunity to sort of bring in new people, change the culture, but a lot of what I brought was just endless optimism that we could do great things. And I'm a super extroverted guy and a very, very positive person. Mm-hmm. And, just getting great, talented people, which already were, many of whom were already there, to believe again that we could do really impactful work, was half the battle. When things aren't going well, and you have senior leadership defections, and you're losing clients, and all these things, and there's a lot of competition sort of growing up around you. It can cause people to be really deflated. People are starting to look for other roles at other companies, and just getting that confidence back, that belief. And you start small. You can't. Rome wasn't built in a day. You can't change things overnight, but you just start rolling out. You're bringing in some new people, rolling out some small product updates, things start working, and people start to believe again. Yeah. And that is such an important part of success in business. Is that
small wins.
Having small wins that you can build on, so that you can build the confidence of the organization. As soon as people believe that you can do great things, you can. I mean, it's really, so much of it is in the believing that you can do it. Great people, smart, talented people that work in a collaborative way, that sort of understand what the North Star of the organization is and share a common set of values. They can do incredible things, and I saw it at Politico, and I'm convinced that virtually any company that formula always works.
And if you had to, you were there for I think a little over 4 years before you sold the company. In that 4-year time horizon, if you had to pick sort of the 3 to 4 strategic pillars of your strategy to take this company and reignite it and grow it to the heights you did, what would be those 3 or 4 key things that had to get done, or that did get done?
I mean, it really boils down to one thing, Rich. I mean, it's just about people. It's making sure that you have the right people on the bus, in the right seat, everybody moving in the same direction. And very few organizations sort of find that at any moment in time. But when you find it, when we had some people leave, we had some new people come in, we reorganized, but we got to that point where we had a really talented group of people that were all sort of rowing in the same direction. We had real alignment between editorial and our business strategy, and the business it really started to take off at a time when very few media companies were finding success. In fact, most of the kind of digital entrants from the era when Politico was started, many of them, if not all of them, were in decline. And so we were one of the few that were able to sort of, transition into, an even higher level of, sort of profitability. So it's so exciting. I mean, it was so exciting to see, but it really, I mean, honestly, it boils down to people and media companies. And, this is obviously a group of people that understand this. They require buzz. They require constant sort of energy, and I spent a lot of time on that, and other people, spent an enormous amount of time sort of creating that buzz. But it really starts with the content. At the end of the day, when you start putting out, really great content that's impactful, and Politico did that in spades. It creates buzz, and buzz allows you to go to advertisers and subscribers, and that is a hugely positive aspect of any media company, probably more so than just about any other sector.
Was there anything from a positioning standpoint you had to change? Like when you came in, did you say, Politico is positioning in the market as this, we actually need to tweak it? Or did you say, I like our positioning, we just need to execute better?
A lot of it was execution. I think we really sort of spent a lot of time, in my first, in the early days, just really like on a whiteboard, like who is our customer? Like who is our audience?
Right.
Where is the white space? How can we create value? And it was literally, our business was built around reaching influentials. And there's a lot of talk about that in the media space, these models that are built around reaching influential audiences. And there are lots of reasons why that is a great business model. But it was built around reaching the most influential people in politics and policy. And we really thought about like senators, their chiefs of staff, people that run big associations, major lobbyists, Fortune 500 companies that have big government affairs footprints. Like we thought, like, who are we creating this content for?
Right.
And like we thought about, like, is a university president, is that, like we, and maybe they're in tier 2, like, but we wanted a common understanding about who our audience was, and that we were creating unique content for a very, very specific audience. And when you do that, you create real value. And when you create valuable content, you can charge a lot for it and drive high margins. And that's what happened. So we spent enormous time thinking about exactly who I remember saying in the early days, Jeff Bezos says, don't worry about your comp. Everybody was worried about Axios at the time. Everybody. I mean, it was like that's all our clients wanted to talk about. And I would always say, don't worry about your competition, worry about your customer. And we spent a lot of time really focused on that. And I think it was pivotal. So we knew exactly who we were creating content for. I thought that was sort of a critical first thing. And that was really a process we went through in like the first 6 months I got there.
Right. And just for our audience to know, in terms of your revenue streams, obviously advertising was a big part. Did you end up creating any subscription products as well, or are you mostly ad revenue?
So no, we were about 50-50 roughly.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you did get up to 50% subscription.
We did. We had a super premium subscription business called Politico Pro, which is, average contract was like 10,000.
And was that already in place when you got there?
It was. It was.
Put it on steroids, or?
Yeah, I mean, we did a bunch of different things, but we really started to think about sort of the not just the content, but really the product that we were delivering to our customers. And we thought about how to sort of reprice and repackage what we were already doing, and those were sort of critical steps. I would say the other thing that happened pretty early on is we made a pretty significant investment in our technology. We had a very significant technology deficit when I got there.
That's important.
For media, we had multiple content management systems that really didn't communicate with each other. And so there was almost no way for us to track our customer journey.
Right.
And so we made a pretty significant investment very, very early on in our technology. And that proved to be, it doesn't feel great when you're making the investment because, we're already not a profitable company.
Right. Credit to your owners too.
Absolutely. Robert always did the right thing when and he's a total visionary, but, he agreed immediately that that's what we needed to do. And that was something that paid off over many years. And it took probably, it took probably a full year to get that technology investment to work. But once we did, that proved to be very valuable down the road.
Yeah. You mentioned that the underlying success factor, it really boils down to people, but obviously as the leader, one of your roles is to make sure you have the right people, you bring in the right people, you motivate people. So talk about your leadership traits. What do you think is your superpower, if you will? What are some of the leadership traits you live by and you think you delivered on in that job at Politico?
I mean, your ability to attract, retain, develop, and mentor talent in your organization, it's your job. I mean, it is the most important thing that you do as a CEO, and all of those things have to be done. And you have to make tough decisions also about people that maybe, just they're not in the right seat, and there's no way to coach them to get them in a position, where they can be successful. And so you have to be willing to make tough decisions about people. But, to me, sort of the role of a leader is to help, sort of get the absolute best out of your people, to help them understand and play to their strengths and mitigate their weaknesses. And, I spent an enormous amount of time with, the team. And, but I would say that ability to attract, go out. I mean, I found an amazing CFO who's still the CFO of the company. I found an amazing chief product officer who, after I left, is now the general manager at the Wall Street Journal. But I brought in, some key people. We got a new editor in chief that came in, and we had some people, that left at the same time. And so that leadership team sort of reconfigured, and it really started to gel. And, the culture of the organization started to change, and people started to believe that there was nothing that could really stop us from doing exceptional work. And that we were like, it was like Politico, like pound your chest, like we're the one that everybody should be afraid of, instead of looking over our shoulder to find out where our competitor was going to hit us next.
Yeah. And you hit on the word, you spend an enormous time with your group. And I do think it's important to emphasize that piece, because when you say attract, retain, motivate people, there's so much time and effort that goes into it that, again, it's some experience I've had as well. And maybe a lot of folks on this who are watching this may not know or appreciate that, but there's an enormous amount of time. Oftentimes you don't want to spend, you're like, oh, I know I'm going to have this really hard conversation now, or, I've got to motivate this person who's down and out right now. And so talk a little bit about the time investment there.
You never say, I'm glad I waited another 6 months to make that tough decision. I'm glad I waited.
Great point.
It will never happen. Right. And so you, as a leader, you have to take on all the tough issues, and you have to take them on as quickly as you can. And you can't, you can't solve all the problems at once, right? You have to prioritize, figure out what are the, goal setting and accountability is such a important, element of being a good manager. But you have to make decisions quickly. It's, like almost urgently. And you have to be willing to have tough conversations every day when you walk in the office. You just, you have to say to yourself, like, I know this is going to be tough, but it's my job. And, you're ultimately responsible for Politico, it's 800 people, their families. Like, it's a huge responsibility that you feel every day. But part of that responsibility is a willingness to have the tough conversations, even if you just it's like you can't have another one, but you have to. Right. You have to force yourself to do it. And the other thing is that just making decisions, that you're never going to have the battle plan figured out. Like, if you can get to 80%, you're so far ahead, right? And there are people that try and wait until every last detail is figured out, and you cannot do that. You have to get sort of 80%, because you figure out, generally you don't ever get everything right in the battle plan, but you pivot, you figure out what doesn't work. And it's all in creating a battle plan and moving, and creating momentum. Momentum is an incredibly powerful force in an organization. And, you never want to squander momentum. And you do that by not making decisions. Effectively, what happens is you throw a giant wrench into your factory, and everything stops until that decision gets made. And it has 17 impacts that flow down through the organization. And so you don't have to get every decision right. You certainly want to make the big decisions you want to get right. And you're always going to have to make those calls, but you can't get bogged down with having every detail figured out. You just have to make decisions based on the best information that you have, and move the organization forward. And in moving forward, through the energy and momentum that you create by making that decision, you solve all, the 20 or 50% that you couldn't possibly have seen when you made the decision, you figure out.
Yeah. It's funny, for the MBA experience, they do these surveys of folks who've been out of business school for many years, and they ask them what were the courses that were most important that you took. And people think the answer will be accounting or marketing. And the survey showed, the predominant answer was the courses on human resource management and managing people and
organizational behavior.
Organizational behavior. And it's true. That was true for me as well. Because you can always hire people to do the functional areas, right?
Yeah. I mean, Bob Bees, who for the people that were in the business school, like exceptional professor. I learned more from that guy than almost anybody else at Georgetown. But really thinking about, we're all humans, right? We've got ambitions and fears and desires and families and you have to just understand, and we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. So much of being a great manager and leader is being, again, there are obviously examples of people that don't have those skills that have been very successful. But for me, the ability to sort of relate to, sort of develop, coach, be sort of a friend to when you have, when it's called for, to your employees that are going through difficult times. And we all, especially through COVID, the amount of stress and sort of, personal angst that people were feeling was extraordinary. Mm-hmm. You have to do all of that.
Yeah. What are some adjectives that your direct reports would use to describe your management style? Positivity. I think a lot of, people would, optimistic, relentless. I just, I left everything on the field every day, and it was really it was this extraordinary, I started, sort of months after Trump was inaugurated. And so, and our business was around political news and information. So it would have been intense under any circumstance, but it was, the old Spinal Tap, this one went to 11. It was really an intense 24/7 job for 4.5 years. But every day you had to bring your absolute A game, and, you had to be willing to leave everything on the field. And, I did, and so many people that worked with me did. It wasn't, you're just one person. As a CEO, and again, you need to bring in some great people, you need to make some big calls, but at the end of the day, it's all about, leveraging this incredibly talented group of people that are part of your leadership team. And they brought it every day. And by the way, it gets easier the more you start winning, right? It's really hard when you're losing. But once you start winning, it becomes a hell of a lot more fun. And we saw that. We went from being a unprofitable business to being an extraordinarily successful business over about 4.5 years. And, that's that's a great experience to sort of see, and to find teams, like great teams are very elusive in life. You think about as a kid, all the teams that sports teams or, artistic things, shows, like when they're you get that lightning in a bottle magic moment where you have a great committed group of people that all, sort of share the same vision and a common set of values. Those are few and far between in life. And when you have it, you got to run as fast as you can. And we did. Yeah, that's great. Is media in your future, Patrick, or are you open to going back into other industries? Or
it's a good question, right? Because I
have announced on this platform today,
I've really enjoyed this period of kind of decompression, since stepping down, and then we sold the business in October. So I don't have anything to announce today, but I can't think of a more sort of impactful or exciting sort of sector of the economy to work in than media. And I've worked in a couple of different ones, and I loved every minute of my experience in government. And I absolutely love my experience, working in banking. But there's a certain relevance and impact that you can have in the media space that I think it's outsized. Somebody said to me the other day, I'll probably botch it, but they said selling a media business for $1 billion is like selling another company for $1 trillion. I mean, these are very complicated businesses to run. But they're really, I mean, Politico was fun. We had so much fun doing what we did. And it got more fun the more successful we got. But there's just very few businesses where I think people get as much enjoyment out of it. Whether you're on the editorial side or the business side, it's the same. And there's a level, I mean, for at Politico, we really did understand fundamentally that what we were doing had a real impact on our country and our democracy. And it was a big responsibility that we did not take lightly. But at the end of the day, I mean, as you think about creating a sort of an important mission, people came to Politico because they believed that the work that we did was important and impactful. And you can never separate that from the success that we found.
Yeah, that's great. Great way to tie it up in a bow. Before we sign off, I always love to ask our guests to give some advice for maybe some of our students who are listening or recent alumni, or maybe even others who want to break into media who haven't been in it. Any words of wisdom or advice for someone who wants to break into media or news media per se?
I mean, I think with my advice is almost always the same, is that, the most important asset that you have is yourself, your own sort of intellectual, capacity, your own, your constitution, your ability to sort of work hard. Like you have to be willing to take risks in yourself. And everything that I've done that's been successful is because I took a big leap. And
you've frankly demonstrated that.
Yeah. You have to believe fundamentally that, you have to have the confidence to know that, again, that if you're reasonably intelligent, that you can figure it out. But, if you want to take no risks in life, you can buy treasuries and get, 0.00% interest, right? There's a reason why, and that's not to suggest you don't take sort of, risks that you adjust for lots of different factors. But I think, people have to, especially at a young age, and, there are kids coming out of Georgetown that have a lot of college debt and right, they've got to, and so thinking about your own personal situation, your family, whether you have young kids, like all these things. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone ever regrets betting on themselves. And I just, constantly push people to, take, have the confidence to do new things. And people are like, how did you pivot from, I just did, I took the leap, I got an MBA and I was like, I'll figure it out. And I really, you can, I knew nothing about investment banking when I got there. And I knew absolutely nothing about media when I got to Politico, but you almost always you can figure it out. And, what's the worst that can happen? You fail and you go try something else.
Right. Like or you fall back on what you do know.
Yeah. Life is long, and, you can't be afraid of failure. You always have to have the confidence to know that you can succeed, but you can't be afraid of failure.
I think that's such an important message, particularly for younger people, because they have this outsized notion that first job you get is like the be all end all, and it's the foundation for everything. And I always try to say to kids who are graduating or maybe just gotten out of school, like, don't put so much weight on that first role. Get in whatever industry you're interested, get in and then figure it out and prove yourself. But don't feel like you have to get the perfect job. And just because your friends are getting what seems to be the perfect job, don't feel that stress or pressure, especially in media where there's no linear, traditional, conventional path.
Yeah. I think if you take, if you're looking to go into conventional jobs, you're going to get conventional returns.
Right.
That doesn't mean that going to Wall Street as a 22-year-old analyst out of college and getting a really good foundation in finance can't be incredibly valuable to you. Yeah. Or going to McKinsey to, be, these are great companies that do an amazing job of training young people. And those are really valuable skills that you learn. Yeah. But I would just, suggest if you don't have a lot of college debt, if you have some flexibility, that you're always going to be better off, sort of pushing yourself to take more risks and to, sort of go into uncharted areas than just staying in that narrow lane that, that you're in or you've been in. And the whole, especially for kids coming out of college, the pressure to get that conventional job it's totally absurd. And I remember everybody feels it, but it does not, where you go to, it's like, I grew up in New York. It's like where you go to preschool does not determine what you're going to do with the rest of your life, or where you go to college or your first job. It's all about trying to get as much sort of experience, building relationships with your peers that in my life have all paid off down the road, and less about getting hung up on, the blue chip brand name job with the, sort of the great company in finance or consulting. Yeah.
Well, that's a good note to leave on. Thank you for that advice. And Patrick, it's been great talking to you again. You've had such an interesting, successful, intriguing background, and it was great to have you share it with us and some of the kind of key tenets that kind of have underlied your success. So thank you for that. Look forward to seeing you soon, I hope, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Rich. And I feel a great debt to Georgetown, and I appreciate you having me on, and anything I can do to pay that forward, I'm always willing to do. So I appreciate you inviting me here today.
Thank you. We appreciate you being on. Thanks.
Take care, Patrick.